All right. Hey, everybody. Today is Saturday, September the 26th, and I am here with Mr. Parker himself. And this is the start of our double feature weekend, actually. And this weekend, we're going to be talking all about the heavy hitter stuff. And I don't know how we plan to do it all in one weekend, but it's going to be filled with a lot. So, for those of you that are new to this platform, my name is Tiffany. I am a social worker by trade, have worked in the industry for a very, very long time. And in doing so, this platform, Tiff Talks, was created in order for us to really just tackle the heavy hitter topics that we're already discussing amongst our friends, amongst our peers, amongst our family, at the beauty shop, at the barbershop, around the water fountain at work. And those things include topics like today, vulnerability. That includes things like generational wealth. That includes things like breaking generational curse. That includes self-care. And we are actually in the midst of a 7-part empowerment series presented by myself and the Tiff Talks team to really discuss empowerment and the hindsight of empowerment. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And today we'll be talking a little bit about the ugly, I guess you can say. Well, this weekend will be a little bit about the ugly. And I am actually going to turn it over to Talk Partner because today I'm not the host, I'm the guest. So I'll turn it over to Talk Partner Ken Shades to go ahead and get started with today's show.
Good evening, everyone. So, oftentimes we define vulnerability as a weakness. And for me, being vulnerable is not weak, it's actually being strong because you have to open up, you have to bear the naked truth, as I would say. And growing up, I was raised by my grandparents, and I promise y'all, I feel like they was Superman and Superwoman. No harm, no nothing. They showed no emotion. Um, and as a child, I wanted to be just like them, like not letting y'all get on my nerves and work me and like holding everything in. It is a myth. You must expose your vulnerability. But that's only with those whom you trust. So it comes with being trustworthy. And I'm not vulnerable with everybody. I pick and choose who I'm going to be vulnerable with. But I'm not going to get into everything at the moment because, y'all, the tables have turned. And today we have our talk host, Tiffany, and our awesome talk partner, Ken. They're going to come and give their perspective from a man and from a woman as it relates to vulnerability because there is a difference that we see amongst, I'm going to say my peers, but everybody. Um, when a woman is vulnerable, oh, she just emotional. When a man is vulnerable, you rarely ever see that. So people tag on the stigma of them being um not themselves, I'm going to say. So at this time, I'm going to allow Tiffany to introduce herself. I know y'all know her, but y'all can hear it again. And then Ken is going to also give an introduction. Now, when y'all do these introductions, don't share all the meat because we fit to get into this dinner here. You hear me? Tiffany?
Right. So, as I mentioned, I'm a social worker by trade. On top of it being a social worker, that is my career. But my passion is what you see here, and that is being able to connect with people, being able to connect with the community and with the culture, and being able to provide insight and education and awareness to topics that I feel as a culture we should be discussing. I am a mom of a whole bunch of kids. I am a daughter. I am a friend. I am a sister. I wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of things. And I think that is good to say about myself. Go ahead.
Oh, it's my turn. Oh, how y'all doing? I'm Mr. Parker. I'm other half.
Oh, I'm a wife
Sometimes. Uh,
all the time.
yeah, that's my other half. I'm talk partner. Yeah, I got a lot of hats. I don't show them. I just do them. I'm a doer, not a shower. I'm a well sale, however you say it. So, dad, son, brother, friend, drinker, bartender, counselor. I'm the mechanic. I
I
mean,
feel like he's taking some of mine a little bit.
anyway,
Yeah.
she ain't a mechanic. She's the
No, I'm not a
cook.
mechanic. I am a cook.
Yeah, we kind of interchange jobs. So, what she don't do, I do, and vice versa. So, yeah. So I'm ready to dive into this dinner because I'm hungry.
Let's get to eating because you know I can eat. Do you hear me? Okay. So a lot of people would ask, why don't you use the Webster dictionary to define vulnerability? Um, but I use the Urban Dictionary because the Urban Dictionary defines vulnerability as when someone is completely and rawly open, unguarded with their heart, mind, and soul. Being vulnerable happens when you trust completely. And for me, vulnerability is being exposed with all of the emotions on the forefront. I mean, I have all of them. I mean, I have my attitude, I have my soft side, I have my sassy side, I have just about every emotion present when I'm being vulnerable. Because I want, not only do I want you to feel me, and not only do I want you to hear me, I want you to feel me. Um, so that's my take on the definition or my perspective of vulnerability. And now I'm going to allow Tiffany and Ken to give their perspective. Ken, would you take the lead on doing the man?
Uh, well, this is gonna get a little ugly. So I mean, men vulnerability is a totally different from women. Because we tend not to show weakness at all, and so that's a big part of why it's hard for us to be vulnerable. It takes a lot. It took me years to learn that aspect of being vulnerable because I'm 30 in my 30s, and it took me to my 30s to learn how to be vulnerable. So all this time I've been hard headed, and I want to talk, and I want to listen. So a man vulnerability is it would take a lot more because you would have to either know the man or break the man or literally like break him down to the T because it's gonna take a dentist, a doctor, a Coast Guard, the police, the National Guard to try to get to a man to be vulnerable because it really shows it. This not our nature to be weak at all. We are built in my mind built to be the strong ones, built to be the rock. So it's kind of like yeah, you got to trust us, love us. I mean, you got to be there for us to be vulnerable. So I mean, it takes a lot, but once we're there, once we open it, it's no looking back. Because once we're vulnerable with you, I mean, we're gonna be vulnerable with you. Period. But that's like Ken Shay said, we pick and choose because you can't do that with everybody, especially with us. So if we do it with you, we love you, like for real. Because you play with our heart, we gonna hurt you. Okay.
So I think before Tiffany goes, what you're saying is that a man views vulnerability as a weakness, which that's what I stated at the beginning. It being, but that's a myth though. And like you say at the end, you open up to those who you choose. They have to know you, they have to love you. I mean, here I might as well say I'm gonna marry you, and that's with my best friend too. Because when we get vulnerable, it's no turn from that. So showing your weakness, I mean that's for women too though. So it's just a play off of that. But I just wanted to get your understanding that the men view vulnerability as their weakness and their myth from the man. Nicole.
So, you forgot one thing when you were talking about the things that will bring about a man's vulnerability, and I'm sure you just kind of overlooked it. And I know we'll get into it at the end. But another thing that will cause a man to be vulnerability is their partner, whether it be their wife
Agree.
or their spouse or whomever they have decided to do life with. So, for me as a woman, when it comes down to vulnerability, I think vulnerability starts with trust. And I say that because you have to truly trust someone to be vulnerable with them. As you mentioned, vulnerability is showing the weakest parts of yourself. And you can't allow everyone to see that within you. And it's not something that's meant to be shared with everyone. So for me, vulnerability starts with being able to trust that person who you choose to be vulnerable with. And I also believe vulnerability, there's a time and a place for it. There's a time and a place for it in each and every relationship with each and every person. If you come out the back being in a relationship for 2 months and you vulnerable, then there may be something there. And that's coming from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint. But when it comes down specifically to women, I oftentimes feel the same to a certain extent when it comes to men. As a woman, me as a mom, I'm supposed to be superwoman. I'm supposed to be able to carry the household, work a 9 to 5, do all these things, that wear all these hats and be this multitasker because I'm a woman. So in weakness, I can't truly always be as weak as I may be at that point, because I have to be strong enough to be strong for my children. I have to be strong enough to be strong for my family. I have to be strong enough to be strong for my husband. I have to be strong enough to be strong for my friends in any relationship ties that I may be in. So I think it's important to understand, as women, we have to be able to match that same strength, because when we're too vulnerable, it's like, oh, she emotional, or oh, she a bitch, things like that. So we can't always wear our vulnerability on our sleeve as well, because it comes with so many stereotypes, if that makes sense. As the angry back woman, because we too vulnerable. So I think it's important to understand the perspective of vulnerability starts with the matter of trust and who you can allow that access of vulnerability with.
I agree, because not everybody deserves that part of you. And that's something that I hold sacred, per se. I keep that for me. And it takes a lot to develop vulnerability. And that's where we're going. It takes time. And for me, you have, within vulnerability, you ask for what you want, you ask for what you need, and you have to be willing to expose those feelings. Um, Again, trust. That's why we keep bringing that up, because if I don't trust you, you won't get that side of me. You will not benefit from my vulnerability. And then I think a lot of people take the vulnerability and they run with it. Like, people tend to misuse you, or because they feel that you weak. But I think in some of my weakest times, maybe the strongest moments of my life. Um, and we about to jump into it, y'all. So for y'all, how do y'all develop vulnerability?
Start this one.
I knew he was gonna say that. So personally, I feel that developing vulnerability um comes with experience. It comes with a lot of emotional risk that you take in life. And that is because, in all honesty, I guess you can say, anytime that you exchange with the person, anytime that you truly interact with the person, you're taking on an emotional risk. Now, the wager or the waiver of that emotional risk is going to be dependent on the person and on the interaction. But in doing that, developing vulnerability comes with experience. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that is a process and a journey that for your own self that you have to learn, because it's not just being vulnerable with a person, it's also being vulnerable with yourself. And I think that's something that we have to kind of make note of for ourselves, and being able to have emotional intelligence. A lot of people aren't familiar with what emotional intelligence is, but emotional intelligence is also being able to understand at what point am I responsible enough to be able to be emotional regarding a certain situation or regarding a certain person. So as it relates to having emotional intelligence for vulnerability is like, at what point am I responsible enough to be able to be vulnerable with the person, to be vulnerable with myself? And when it comes to being vulnerable with yourself, it's really like, am I strong enough to be weak? Am I okay with being strong enough to be weak? And that's challenging for people to take. I mean, I know that's something that I have had to deal with in myself, being able to be strong enough to be able to say, okay, I'm weak, and I'm okay with being weak.
Well, I can
That was
piggyback
good.
off that because for the longest, I struggled with it. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was the biggest thing for me. And I go back to saying men look at vulnerability being weak because we don't want you throwing that in our face about our weak moment. So it goes back to trust. You trust in who you telling, who you being vulnerable with. Because like I said, if you telling me or throw it back in my face about my weak moment, then it's gonna make me retract and not be vulnerable with you ever again. So it's kind of like if I'm being vulnerable with you, like kind of like be receptive of it.
Mm.
Um, so I know I could continue being vulnerable with you. Um,
Trust.
yeah, big thing, trust, big trust. You said something about you had a point, and I liked it.
Emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence. I didn't get that. I never had that till now because I never knew when it was okay to be vulnerable. Like vulnerable, like I would keep that in. I'll be messed up on the inside. I'll be walking around pissed off at the world, pissed off at myself, and I wouldn't say nothing. You ask me what's what? You okay? Yep, I'm fine. Yep, I'm okay. Now you can. She asked me a question. I'm gonna tell you exactly how I feel because I don't hold nothing in no more. I mean, how long it took? Forever?
It took some time.
Like forever. Be honest.
It took some time. I think when it comes to that piece of being emotionally intelligent as well, it also comes into understanding that vulnerability is not always what you say, but it's also what you put out. I think the strongest statements are communicated in a non-verbal way. So just like you said, you would be dealing with stuff within yourself, and I would ask how you doing or what's going on, and you wouldn't be able to verbalize that to me, but your actions or your interactions or what you putting out, your non-verbal cues would be what I saw. And for me, I think that was something that we truly had to work through in our marriage, because he always say, I know you like the back of my hand, I know you. But even in knowing me, you had to know what my nonverbal cues meant. And sometimes, especially when with our marriage, it took being able for me to step back and take those non-verbal cues and allow him time to be able to be vulnerable with me, because me asking over and over again wasn't going to make him want to talk to me. He needed to be able to see that I was okay with allowing him to be vulnerable with himself, and then being able to come to me and share that. And I think that's what truly built that trust between us, where we can be more vulnerable with each other. That was it.
That
I
was
feel like it was
good. That was really, really good. But while we're talking about developing this vulnerability, we talked about what vulnerability, in the man's perspective and a woman's perspective. Um, I would like for you guys to both share a time when you had to be completely vulnerable. And I know that you touched on it previously. It may not be that time when you talk about your marriage and things like that, but give us a time when you had to be completely vulnerable.
Mm, I can start this one off. I think the time my lowest when I think I was lost when I lost my dad. Like I was like I don't cry. Like if you know me, you know I don't cry. Like something ain't happened. If I cry, then there's got to be something serious. And that time, I boohoo for days, for weeks. Even after I see him, I boohooed. Even after I was weak, I didn't know what to do. Like I'm young, I lost my old man. Like that's a feeling I don't think I wish on anybody or like put on anybody. Even to this day, I can go visit them and I still cry. Like that's just a part of me like I can't get over. I mean, I'm okay with it now to this point, but I mean, she actually helped me through that because I really was Like I sit in my bed, I got his picture on my dresser. I look at it, I talk to him, like I'll be fine, but just be the moments to where I can just I break, and I mean I'm human, so it happens. I miss him, so I just have my moments to where, you know, I I I guess I'm still processing. Like I can't have that conversation with him. I can't, call him or hear his voice or hear him talk crazy to me. But she really, 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 really helped me through that moment because yeah, that kind of broke me down to the lowest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I've had a lot of vulnerable moments. But if I had to share one, and I hope it's okay to share a vulnerable moment that I think a time that Ken and I were both very vulnerable at the same point, and we were able to acknowledge each other's vulnerability is when I found out that I was expecting with my last child, my son, Kendall. And we had a lot going on in our life, like a lot going on in our life, a lot going on in our careers at that time. And we were not anticipating, planning, or preparing for a child. And we really kind of just went back and forth to the point we went back and forth with ourselves before going back and forth with each other. And one thing about us is we don't have a problem being honest with each other. Like, and that's gotten better over time, but we don't have a problem with being honest with each other. But we had gotten to the point where we had been honestly mean with each other, and being honestly mean with each other, we were really at a point where we were hurting each other with our words. And I remember one day it was after I'd gotten off of work and was winding down, and we've always worked opposite shifts. So I was getting ready to wind down, and he was getting ready to go to work. And here I am, I'm already emotional with myself because I'm having this baby and I'm struggling and I'm this and I'm that and I'm this. And I'm feeling like he's not being the person that I needed for him and before needed from him, excuse me. And before I knew it, me spitting out and hurting him with my words was the first time that he'd come back at me and really hurt me with his words. And in the midst of him hurting me with his words, he broke down in tears. And we had a moment where we both just had to see each other at our weakness and be able to understand what we were going through personally and be able to respect each other and respect that vulnerability and that weakness in each other. And I think that was a real defining moment in our relationship or in our marriage, because I learned at that moment that even though he may not say that he's weak or he may not say what's going on within himself, that when it's time for him to show it, he'll show it. And it took me by surprise, and it really allowed me to have more respect for him as a husband and a father at that moment, because I saw him at his weakness, and it wasn't just his actions, it was the tears coming out of his eyes and him being able to be that vulnerable with me and to share that.
Oh yeah, that was deep.
I try not to, but okay.
Yeah, that was deep. Ken, I can relate. Um, my most vulnerable moment is when I lost my father. I still go back and forth with that. Um, and my person, I had to be I had to be completely vulnerable. Like I was to the point where I was really down. I don't want a marriage. I don't want, I didn't want kids. My daddy can't see them. Marriage. My daddy can't walk me down the aisle. So I've battled with that for years. I can say every day, it's not one day that goes by that I do not open up or break down. And and then when my grandfather passed, it's like it's just boom, everything is just hitting. Then the situation with my mama hitting. So I have to be vulnerable with those that I trust, because keeping all of that in, I'm telling you, if I had to keep all of that in, oh, it'd be like World War Kinshay. You hear me? And I wouldn't know how to control the actions. So I think vulnerability for me allows me to um pour out of my cup what's in it. Not necessarily like the overflow, but I'm able to dump a little bit, and it helps my cup maintain the stability of it. So yeah. losing someone, you have to be completely vulnerable.
And that's like
Um,
me. You can kind of relate because we kind of lost our fathers the exact same way in the same place. So
Mhm.
yeah,
yeah, that's kind
yeah.
of.
That's good.
So we here.
I like, if I can piggyback off a point that you just made, Shay,
Hmm.
about being able to, allowing yourself to be vulnerable is allowing you to have some of that overflow or release some of that overflow from your cup. And when we go back to those times when we talk about being able to trust and have access or allowing access to our vulnerability, I think about how when we allow that access, we need to be mindful of who we allow that access to and with. And that is oftentimes because some people, they can't be secure in their own vulnerability, let alone be able to take on yours. And in not being able to take on yours, those things that you're putting out, that vulnerability that you're putting out, can be distorted in their own imagery of that. So like you say, when people take on this mind frame that vulnerability is a sign of weakness and not a sign of strength, it's oftentimes because people are not secure enough in their own vulnerability where they can accept another person being vulnerable enough to share that with them.
Agree. Whew. Girl, dropping gems. If y'all ain't got no pen, no pad, no nothing, put some in your notepad on your phone. Cause I'm telling y'all, it was some gems dropped. Um, and just to like not necessarily wrap up, but we've already talked about the perspectives of vulnerability. We've already talked about how we develop vulnerability. We've given um one of our most vulnerable moments. Um, how do we take on vulnerability as it relates to our family? You briefly touched on the marriage, in friendships, single life, that's me, um, and within your career. Because I mean, I struggled with being vulnerable with my career. Um, who, y'all, I struggle with that daily. And it took some time for me because I guess because of the person, or the area where I work, being vulnerable for me, it's like, okay, I can't do that here, I don't want them to go, lay me on the altar and, handle business, no. So I have to go to work with the mindset of, and I've just become vulnerable with my boss. Like I will go to work, like all this stuff that's going on with my mom and stuff like that, I would never break down, like never. So I had to develop that trust with my boss, who is also my pastor. So I had to be very vulnerable. And one day I came in work and it was just so much. I mean, like death, sickness, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Lord, I had to break down. And that was the first time I can say that I was honestly vulnerable with him. And then now it's like a safe spot per se, because we have conversations on a daily. I don't have to go to work, with this built up animosity. It don't be against him, it just be about life situation. And being able to open up to him, that was the career aspect for me. With my family, I'm very vulnerable with my family now. I think I'm about the one with all the emotions. Um, and I thank my granny for that, because they were restricted for, the first part of my life. Because I wanted to be like them, nothing bothered them. I can count on one hand how many times I've seen my grandmother shed a tear when she not at church, because if you take her to church, she gonna shed them. But outside of that, I've never seen my grandmother cry. Um, Everything is out, I mean, inward for her. And that's why we end up at Methodist. They know us by name. So, how do you handle vulnerability as it relates to your family, your marriage, single life? I'm very vulnerable with my person, um, on and off. But I'm very vulnerable. So that's the single life. Tiffany.
Oh, I thought Kim was gonna go first. Okay.
Well, Ken, if you want to take it, be the lead with your family life.
Um, family. That has been a issue for me for the longest because, like you said, I'm like you. For years, I never seen my family cry. So I kind of take that on from my mom because I don't know if I ever seen that woman cry. Like she as hard as a bag of bricks, but she is. I've seen her be vulnerable at the same time, so I always feel like it's um you know I knew I couldn't be if my mama didn't do it. I know I couldn't do it, so it's like I had to be strong. Period. But like in my 30s, like I'm saying now, it's like I can be more vulnerable. I can talk more. I can you still gotta meet people where they at and you know
I like that.
meet people. She just recently taught me that. So whew, you got to meet people where they at and um, only still let people know what you want them to know. That ties into work. With work, you can't take on everything. Do what you can do. Leave everything else there. Because I mean, you only can do so much. Regardless of where you at in life, you only can do so much. Kind of like being vulnerable. Another part of being vulnerable is finding place, leaving home at home, leaving work at work.
Mm-hmm.
You got to separate those two as well because you can't crisscross the two.
Mm-hmm.
Gym,
Jim.
y'all.
You gotta you leave your address, you keep it at your address,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing will work because the two not supposed to cross at all.
Mm-hmm.
You could be vulnerable at work in your own way, but you have to have some kind of sanity at work. You can't be stressed. You can't put too much on that you can't bear. Like none of that. Like you really have to find your boundaries
Mm-hmm.
at either or because boundaries set in place with vulnerability, set in place with everything else. All they go hand in hand together.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have boundaries, and that's how you can kind of balance your vulnerability at work. Um, you don't want to be the emotional person at work, like period. And especially with everybody else. Oh, don't leave him alone. He gonna cry. Oh, he gonna tell. Or you can't be that person. So you kind of find that balance to know how to play your emotions at work or at home, and even in marriage. Like I mean, I feel like in a relationship and you trust that person, you can be really 100% vulnerable because you trust that person enough that they're not going to use that against you or y'all can be and being vulnerable in a relationship. I mean, it builds honesty, it builds trust, it builds all of that because now the person knows you inside and out. So it's like they know when you're lying, they know when you're telling the truth, they know. I mean, it's honest, it's open, it's all out in the open. There's nothing, no closed doors, no skeletons in the closet. It's like it's there. So I mean, you have to be vulnerable in your relationship. On and off, how kids say, on and off. You got to be vulnerable. So it all plays. So boundaries gotta have. I feel like pick who you can be vulnerable with, like your favorite aunt or your favorite cousin, somebody they gonna tell your business. Even at work, find somebody that ain't gonna tell your business because everybody will tell your business. It's always good to have that one, but not everybody. But have that one just to vent to because don't hold nothing in. Period. Vent, get it out. Don't go to sleep with nothing on your heart. Let it go. I mean, seriously, it will mess you up on the inside if you hold on to stuff. So find you one, build your trust, set your boundaries. Don't miss working home issues. Leave that where it's at, and let it go. Be free.
Hey Ken, that was really good. I think I took away from that because I remember one time I was having a real hard time at work and I talked to Tiffany. She was like, girl, Ken just told me this. So that's why I feel like, we share him, like that. So, because when she told me that, I was like, you know what? What happened at home happened at home. What happened at work happened at work. And if it's something that's going to spill over, it's going to be there when I get back. So then no point for me to take it home and upset my household. It's just me and my household, so I just upset my damn self. But I'm just saying, at home is at home, and at work is at work. So I like that, Ken. That was a nice gem that you dropped. And then family, sad to say, y'all, before Tiffany go, not all family are deserving of your vulnerability. Just like your peace. All of them do not deserve it, unfortunately, because my blood is my blood, however y'all say it. But what I'm saying is not all family members are deserving of that. Not all friends. Tiff.
Um, so as I kind of mentioned, my experience with vulnerability was a little different than you guys. And I say that because I mean, I didn't see my mom like being overly emotional or anything like that. I think I'm just naturally in tune with my emotions. I mean, my zodiac sign is a Cancer, so I'm in tune with my emotions, and I don't have a problem with sharing those emotions. So my vulnerability has been a lot of what Ken has said, being able to understand and set boundaries when it comes to my vulnerability, being able to not allow myself to be vulnerable with certain people, and being vulnerable at certain times. I've been in situations where I've allowed myself to be vulnerable and I've been gaslit, or I've been, the tables have been turned and it was like my vulnerability was a weakness and I was crazy making something up in my head type thing. So for me, when I found myself to be too vulnerable and not set the boundaries that I've needed to set, then I found myself in a constant state of being emotional and sad and angry, expecting something from expecting myself from people that weren't me and didn't have the same like-mindedness as me, or even respect my own vulnerability or respect my emotional intelligence enough to be able to accept that. um I always tell my children that at the end of the day, no one can ever take how you feel away from you. So with that, that's something that I've always learned and been okay with. And when it comes to being vulnerable, a lot of people, they will try to take that feeling, that your feelings of your emotions away from you for their own greater good. So making you feel like you being too vulnerable or you having an issue with something that is your issue and not their own, if that makes sense. So I've been in several relationships or interactions with friends where I've been too vulnerable and didn't set the boundaries that I needed to set, which at the end put me at an even vulnerable state where I was the one that was hurt and harmed in the situation. Um, when it comes to my work environment, being able to again set those boundaries. My husband tell me all the time, you got a few friends and a lot of associates, and that's true. Because for me, I'm a naturally friendly person, so I speak to everybody. I treat everybody with the same respect that I treat, each and every person, because that's what I anticipate or expect from other people. But being able to set that healthy boundary with people and not being vulnerable with everyone has put me at a place with myself where I'm okay with my interactions or the lack thereof of people who, are not for my better good, or not for my own inner peace or my well-being. Um, as it relates to family, um, believe it or not, I've not necessarily been like the black sheep or the outcast, but I can remember kind of, I guess, years prior that there being like negativity put up on me, because it was like, oh, you like your friends more than you like us, you spend more time with your friends than you spend with us. And for me, that's where the idea of blood is not always thicker than water has come into place, because I have friends that I can call in the middle of the night and do for me what my family won't do for me, or times where I've needed somebody to show up for me and looking for family to show up, and family didn't show up, but my friends was there. And being in that state, being kind of like an outcast to a certain extent, it was kind of like I was wrong for being more vulnerable or being more in tune with my friends than I was with my family. But I feel relation has nothing to do with family. At the end of the day, family is what you make it. And it's gonna be some people in life that you interact with, that you connect with, that you will have stronger ties with than people that you're biologically related to, and that's okay to be that. So for me, my vulnerability has always been a part about being able to set healthy boundaries and being able to make sure that I'm not allowing the access of my vulnerability to be taken advantage of by certain people.
That was good. I think on both sides, man and woman's perspective on that. Um, just to not necessarily wrap up, but kind of like end it. I want to talk about tying vulnerability to the culture. Um, hmm, our culture, per se, and just our time. Because back then, I mean, same culture, just different age. Um, it all plays different. Again, raised by my grandmother, them, no vulnerability, um, no emotions. Knew they loved us. Um, to them, my grandmother was work, take care of y'all, do it all over again tomorrow, and didn't allow much time for vulnerability. And within our culture, I think we get again tied up on, and it's just kind of piggyback or summary of it, what we talked about earlier. I think that, so many view it as a weakness. And for me, I think again, it's the myth that's been told, because being vulnerable, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be as emotional to be vulnerable. So I think you play a part, and you don't have to show your sadness and those emotions to consider it vulnerable. It's just completely trusting someone to open up to, and just that's just what it is. So with our culture, how do y'all think that vulnerability is perceived?
Um, I guess I'll take the lead on this one. So, in this day and time that we're living in now, I see as a culture, we are identifying our vulnerability as strength. And I can appreciate that, because we are changing the narrative of what vulnerability is. I think oftentimes, as it relates to the culture, when you think vulnerability, you think, or people will think, a matter of egos or a matter of pride and things of that sort, when that may not always be the case. I think when it comes down to us putting on our egos versus our vulnerability, is just a protective instinct of our own vulnerability. Because if you putting out this facade of what the ego or what this interpretation may be instead of what it truly is, then you're lacking to be vulnerable enough to be able to put that on display. And you're not taking on the perspective that you're made strong in your own weakness. So, as it relates to our culture, I think oftentimes we need to learn to look past the pride and learn to look past the egos and really zone in and focus on understanding that being vulnerable is a strength. Being able to understand being vulnerable is strength, and being able to. Oftentimes I tell myself when I pray, and Lord, just give me the strength to be able to. And that's in any regard. Give me the strength to be able to move forward with this day. Give me the strength to be able to take on what's presented before me. And if we can say, Lord, allow me to be vulnerable enough to be, I'm sorry, not, well, Lord, in the same instance, but culture, allow me to be vulnerable, be strong enough to be vulnerable in my walk, and to be vulnerable in my talk, to be vulnerable in what I present, then it would be more receptive if we are comfortable within our own culture with putting that out.
Agree.
That's good. I think vulnerability within our culture can goes to as well, like being vulnerable, giving people our culture a chance. We don't trust each other as well. Us as black
True.
people in our culture, we
That's
just
good.
we just don't we don't trust the next man. I mean, it is what it is. But I've noticed in our culture now, it's like we're starting to really lean on each other and help each other out, being vulnerable, giving people a chance, and building up the black business and doing everything now within our culture. Like instead of tearing down it, like we building it up. So I've noticed that being a big thing since all the extra been going on. But I'm really enjoying watching us supporting each other and pushing each other and seeing the next man do better instead of trying to hurt the next man, because that's really old. I mean, to me, it's stupid. It's childish. It's a waste of human life. Like really, just to tear each
Yes.
other down. Like be building each other up in our culture today will be the best thing for us in the future. So yeah.
And if I can say something like piggyback on just what you said, not I think it goes back to something you and I was talking about with the whole Charles Barkley outlook on the Breonna Taylor outcome. When it comes down to what I've seen in our culture more recently, is that those that are strong enough to be vulnerable and strong enough to put the vulnerability out, we don't have a problem at this point with calling other people out. So for instance, when you see your brother or when you see your next man that is lacking in their own education or lacking in empowering our culture and the vulnerabilities thereof our culture, I've seen where so many people, celebrity, non-celebrity, who at this point they don't have a problem with calling out the people who are supposed to quote unquote represent the culture. And I think it's important when it comes to that, we all have a platform. Your social media is your platform, and what you put out always has an impact. So sometimes, and that goes back to being able to trust what you putting out, trust who you allowing access to. Whatever you put out, even if you don't agree, if you go against the culture, sometimes that needs to be kept within yourself. If we are for the culture, then we need to make sure that we are aligned with the culture and being able to make sure that we're putting out the good that comes from our culture. Because tearing down the next person don't do nothing but allow the next person from another culture to allow a vulnerability in to tear us down, and that's not what we need.
Well, it's already enough bad in our culture anyway, so we don't need no more bad to be added
Right.
to it. So we have enough that we can tear down for the rest of our life, but start building up to where the bad can, the good can outweigh the
Really
bad.
bad.
Period.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's where we need to. That's why I'm happy that the vulnerability has in our culture for us to start supporting each other.
Yeah.
And I mean, the bad apples gonna be the bad apples. Eventually, they'll get pushed out, but it is what it is. It's a process.
That's
So
good. That's good.
Yes, and that about sums it up for today's show on vulnerability. But I do have one last question that we normally would ask any other guests. So I would like you guys to share your testament from today's show.
it's your show.
I feel like I should
Be
go.
vulnerable, King.
I feel like I should go last. So my testament from today, from all that we've shared and discussed in regards to vulnerability, I would say if there's one thing that I want people to take away, that would be understanding that um, vulnerability is not a weakness; it's truly a strength. And being able to understand that even in your weakness you can and you will be made strong as long as you set those boundaries in vulnerability, and that you be mindful of the access that you allow to your vulnerability, and that is in every area of your life. um, I think if we all took the time to be more vulnerable with each other, then that will lead to more compassion for each other. And in that we will have and live amongst each other in a better way. So for me, I think we need to be more mindful of viewing vulnerability as a strength instead of a weakness. And it will also lead to so much more good that will bring out of each of us as individuals.
Um, what I took from today is, and kind of go hand in hand with accountability, vulnerability goes. They go hand in hand just because without those two, you won't be able to grow as a person. Um, you have to be vulnerable to grow. Period. You got to crack the egg on that one. It is what it is. I mean, you will be stuck in the same place if you will not be vulnerable. So teach yourself how to be vulnerable. I mean, it's not an overnight process. It's gonna take some time, but at least try. Do little steps, baby steps, within your career, within your relationship, within your family, within yourself. Start being vulnerable today, like period. Because if not, then you'll be stuck in the same place for a long time until you get to that point of being vulnerable. Men or women.
Oh, y'all. Let me just share my testament. They done gave all the meats. I'm trying to have dessert. But anywho, I think my testament for today would be vulnerability starts with you. So with yourself. Um, don't I can't say what I really want to say because I was gonna say handle your vulnerability like you change, but everybody don't change. But what I'm saying is hold your vulnerability. That's yours. Only allow access to those whom you trust. So if you don't trust them, you don't be vulnerable because the person that you give your vulnerability to or you're vulnerable with may sabotage your life per se. Like Ken would say, stagnated. If you don't show that vulnerability, if you don't, again, pour out of that cup, for one, you'll never be able to add to it. So if I'm not getting rid of, you know how you have some Kool-Aid and you have ice, and then if the ice melt in the Kool-Aid, then at the top you just have that watery taste, no sugar, no nothing. But me, I gotta take that out and then get some fresh ice. So you have to be able to release and refill. So to me, that was my testament from today's show. It has been awesome, awesome, awesome. And now I'm gonna let her finish her word. Tiffany, close us out.
I agree. Today has been an awesome show. It's always difficult for me to, or not difficult, but challenging for me to um let go of some of the control when it comes to Tiff Talks. And
Amen.
I want to commend you, Kinshay, for just being able to take the lead on this. I mean, she wrote the whole outline, scheduled everything. We got the outline like it was supposed to. See, now y'all know what I do behind the scenes. But
Agree.
but you did an awesome job, and I appreciate you taking the lead on this. And I am not at all disappointed. I can't wait till you do it again, girl. But it's been an awesome show. I'm glad that you guys have allowed us to be able to share these moments with you guys. And I look forward to this series continuing and being able to add more gems and drop more gems, because this is what we need right now. You know, we're in a state of uncertainty, and if we can empower and build each other up, even if it's in this 45 minutes to an hour every Sunday, then that's something that you will be able to carry with you throughout the week. So I appreciate you guys, Tiff Talk audience, for being able to tune in and to continue rocking with us, because it is much appreciated, and we will not disappoint you in the content that we continue to put out. So make sure that you also tune in tomorrow, which is September the 27th, which is our normal talk day. And the second part of this double feature, where we will be talking collateral beauty. And that is going to be with talk guest Raquel Oliver. She's actually a return guest, so I know it's going to be good. And we will be going live on Facebook and on YouTube at 4 o'clock. So make sure you set your notifications for that. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and repost this live feed. And we'll be sure to remain connected to you. For our handlers, they're right here. Make sure that you follow us and make sure that you follow us, I said, on all social networks, and that you remain connected. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.